Well, for already, I just want to say thank you all for being here this morning. The goal this morning is to review the findings from the incident that took place at the RaceTrac on South Orlando back in June of last year. You know, it's important to provide as much information as far as clarity of the circumstances that took place and review the actions of our officers. So on June 1st of last year at the RaceTrac at 3760 Orlando Drive, 5:08 in the morning, our officers responded to a disturbance call. It was a 911 call regarding an employee who was locked in a bathroom with a homeless male. Officers arrived on scene during the call. Officers entered the bathroom of the gas station, took the individual into custody. The victim sustained severe lacerations to her neck and her mouth. On March 2nd of this year, a video was circulated on YouTube with clips from the body cam of this incident. The body cam was released via a public records request. There were 18 videos, approximately 7 hours and 23 minutes. There were some concerning issues with regards to the response to the two officers, or the two primary officers who responded to this incident. So what we're going to show you is just a portion of this video. And it's probably the biggest part of the video where you will see that there is a floating, looks like a wolf head or wolf design that's in the background of this video. What that will give you is a good idea that this video was doctored and that the 911 call that was received through dispatch was not relayed to the officers. And what many people have a misconception of is that when someone calls 911 or you call the non-emergency number, you're automatically going to hear everything that the dispatcher and or the call taker is going to get. That's not what happened. So we'll go ahead and play a video. Again, if you look at the video, you'll see a little wolf thing right there, and then you'll see like a wolf design in the back. That was transposed by the individual who posted the video.
My coworker, my shift manager, has been locked in the men's bathroom with another man who's not letting her out. Okay, hold on. You said your coworker's locked in the bathroom? Did he put his hands on her? Hello? He's got a knife. Okay. Can he cut her neck?
So what many people on our social media have posted was that the officer actually heard those cries and screams. So what I want to do is give you the general procedures of what takes place. There are two different forms of communications that happens upstairs in the communication center. The first is what's called a call taker. So if you call 911 or if you call the non-emergency number, what ends up happening is someone is going to take that call and they're going to listen to what you have to say. The next thing happens is that information is given to a dispatcher. The dispatcher is the one who actually, you will hear in the next video, who is giving the information to the officer who is going to the scene. That same information is given to all of the officers, which is completely different than the overlay that took place. The officers did not hear the screams and shouts that you just heard that was overlaid on that video. So this is the actual video and dispatch that went to all of the officers within the city that morning. You may hear me speak over so I can give you ideas of what's taking place.
3760 Orlando Drive, 56 is completed. Their coworkers locked in the bathroom with a male, and they're screaming her in the background.
The dispatcher doesn't hear it either. The only person who hears that screaming is the call taker. So essentially, it started out as a disturbance. And now they've upgraded this to a call where the individual has a knife. This is the actual body cam, the actual information that the officers are hearing.
It's just me and my assistant manager, and I'm in the bathroom. Where's your assistant manager? She's in the bathroom. Really? Sir! What's the problem? To the door, I'm inside the store. Apparently the subject is inside with the assistant manager. Hey, can you hear me? Hey, can you wait outside? Can you wait outside?
So as the officer enters, and here's where some of the deficiencies come in. The officer met with the individuals who witnessed this incident. The officer had information once he got inside. The officer at one point can hear an audible coming from the bathroom. Once we get a little further on, I'll explain the fact that the officer should have taken appropriate action at that time. The second officer who arrived is Officer Castro. His video is coming up next. This is Officer Castro's actual body cam. Again, his encounter with the individuals outside leads him to have some information, but not clearly the information needed. So during the course of this time, you hear Officer Castro ask, "What do you want to do?" Officer Delorbe says, "We're going to wait."
Sir, can you come on with your hands up? Sanford Police! Sanford Police!
In a few seconds, you'll hear the third and fourth officer who will arrive on scene. Officer Delorbe is now speaking with Officer Morales.
So what?
In a moment, you'll see Officer Byrd, who will arrive and moves toward the door, where effectively he goes in. So during the course of this, the first two officers essentially had every responsibility to go in based on our policies and procedures. The next two officers who arrived effectively followed the department procedures and moved forward. So on March 3rd, the officers who arrived was Officers Morales and Byrd. They heard the victim call for help. And then Officer Byrd, as I said before, immediately moved toward the door and effectively subdued the individual. On March 3rd, the information came to my office about the circumstances of this case. Officer Delorbe and Officer Castro were placed on administrative leave immediately and was taken out of service on March 10th. Additionally, the supervisors in that chain of command were also fully involved in this internal affairs investigation. The findings of the case. The first officer who arrived was Dominic Delorbe. He was the first officer there. He was dispatched at 5:09 and arrived at 5:10. The second officer, my notes are all out of order. I was coming down the stairs and my papers went all over the place. So in the call on his body cam, you could hear the employee is locked in the bathroom. They upgraded it to a 00, indicating that there was a knife that was there. Delorbe was the most veteran officer on the scene initially. He asked to make sure that it wasn't a signal 23, which is talks about a robbery. When he got there, he was informed she had been cut, she was down in the bathroom, and it was on the last door. He was also informed that the individual had a knife, and that subsequently the individual or our victim had been cut and was called multiple times, or heard calling for help multiple times. Officer Giovanni Castro arrived on scene. You can hear in his transmissions, it was similar to that of Officer Delorbe's. He arrived at 5:12. Again, in his body cam, you hear the same information that Delorbe heard. The witnesses informed him that she had been cut. The one difference between the two of them is that Delorbe was there first. Delorbe heard the victim making calls and asking for help. Delorbe failed to move forward and take action at that point. You hear Officer Castro ask, "What do you want to do?" Officer Delorbe tells him, "We want to wait." Again, I want to preface is that Delorbe was the most senior officer on the scene at that time. One of the important parts about our response to resistance, SOP, is that the agency's policy during an active assailant threat where continuous violence or death is responsible, essentially is this. The officers had a responsibility and a duty to act. They had a responsibility and duty to act if there was one officer or two officers. He knew that someone had already informed him that a situation had taken place, and it was clearly his responsibility, the first officer, to take action. The second officer that got there, again, following directions of the most senior person there, he should have taken action, but made the decision, hey, can we get a shield? Should we wait for additional officers? What are the circumstances that are there? Clearly, the first officer failed to provide the additional information needed for the second officer to move forward. So the findings in this case, Officer Delorbe was sustained. He was sustained for failure to respond alone and engage the active assailant and neutralize the threat, where anyone is engaged in an active or ongoing act of violence toward another, and there is risk of serious bodily harm or death. During the course of my termination of Officer Delorbe for his failure to act, he presented a letter of resignation, which I accepted. Officer Castro, being a probationary officer, junior officer that was there, following the directions of his senior officer, was suspended for 5 days without pay, an extension of his probationary period, and retraining on the active assailant process. And one of the things that I do want to make very clear is In June of last year and again June of this year, our active assailant training has been redone. Every officer has gone through the active assailant training, and they will go through a second phase of that training next month in June. Additional findings. The supervisors who failed to follow rules and regulations 300-6 for properly notifying the chain of command was sustained. There was a sergeant, a lieutenant, and a captain in those orders, and each of them received a letter of counseling. Additionally, in one of the other body cams, and as we indicated before, there were 18 body cams in 7 hours and 23 minutes of actual films. We saw that one of our other officers made a derogative, off-colored comment about the mental health of the suspect. That officer resigned during the reception or inception of this investigation. 2 of the officers are no longer employed with the city of Sanford. And so we do recognize that this is a tragic situation, and we as a department want to be transparent and acknowledge that there is some concerns. We believe that we have taken the appropriate actions to deal with those circumstances. We appreciate the patience given by our community as we work through this investigation, and as its conclusion. We will continue to expect our officers to fulfill their duties with integrity, dedication, and adhere to department policies and procedures. And with that, I'll take whatever questions you may have.
How long did Officer Delorbe been serving here in the city of Sanford, sir?
Officer Delorbe started in July of 22.
And he was the most veteran, you said?
Yes.
So you're saying you had not seen this body camera video yourself until early March when that blogger got hold of it? Is that the first time you
That
saw
was
it?
correct.
And to community members say, look, this was a serious incident, a young woman being held. There's that lapse there. I mean, shouldn't you have been informed about this incident sooner, Chief?
Absolutely. And as you can see, when I talked about the reporting section, is that it went from the sergeant, lieutenant, and the captain. The failure is that they believed that information had been sent up. The information had never reached my office to that point. And the other part that I want to make sure is clear is that a lot of people have this misconception that everything that happens in the community, the police chief knows. Last year alone, we handled more than 112,000 calls for service. There is no way in the world that I, as a police chief, or any other police chief, is going to know every case or every call that happens. But something of this severity should have come to my attention. It did not come to my attention, and therefore, when it did come to my attention, we took the appropriate actions at that time.
And you speak to his officer, I believe it was Officer Bird, the one who finally went in there. Does anyone want to say about his actions? That, I mean, this woman was cut, missing tooth, just, I mean, he saved the day, that officer.
Yes, and actually, Officer Bird was recognized for his endeavors, for going in and taking the initiative to ensure that this young lady was saved. Yes, ma'am.
Chief, there are people who watched this video and lost trust, who think the next time I call Sanford Police, are they going to hesitate? What do you say to them?
I will assure you that there will be no more hesitations with that. I believe one of the things that has come out of this is that it has allowed us to take a look at ourselves and take a look internally. One of the things that we have done internally as well is made sure that our supervisors are reviewing the body cams more often, more accurately, and more in detail. And when situations rise to such a level, that information is going to be brought up to my attention or the attentions of internal affairs or our office. We have, and many of you who know me well enough, I've been here for 12 years, started my 13th year on April 1st. One of the things that has been very important for me is to build the trust, to build the relationship, to build the things that people learn to trust us when we're out there. This was a mistake. And I think one of the most important parts about any leadership is that you accept the fact that there was a problem, and that you accept your portion of that problem, and that you correct those issues to make sure that those things won't happen again. And we have done that. We've seen that there was a concern. We've seen that there was an issue. And we've effectively put things into place to make sure that those issues don't happen again.
Chief, question over here. If you could, to that point, people kind of want to look behind the screen for a little bit. If you can explain what the internal investigation process looked like. So you talked about looking at body camera video, the interviews, so people understand when you say you looked into this, this is what it looks like.
So essentially, we have a couple different ways that we look at internal affairs. So if you're a general citizen and you come in, you have the ability to write out a complaint if you feel that an officer has done something inappropriate. That could start as low as a sergeant or another officer initiating an internal affairs complaint. From there, it goes through a chain. Our internal affairs division brings the officer in. He reviews the circumstances that are there. One of the things that's important, if it's anything that's on the body cam, we lock those body cams down so no one else has access to them. We do interviews, because one of the things we always have to remember is the police officer's Bill of Rights. So if there are multiple people, as we indicated before, there were 18 videos. So there were multiple people who were on the scene, multiple officers who had to be interviewed, reviewed their body cams. 7 hours of reviewing body cams can be quite daunting, which is why it took a little bit of time for us to do that, to look through and detail each of those body cams to see what information we may have missed. And then from there, a recommendation is done once the finding is determined. So it could be a finding of exonerated, it could be a finding of sustained, not sustained, it could be a policy failure. Once that information is determined through the Internal Affairs Department, what Internal Affairs does is it goes through the chain from the captain, the deputy chief, and then to myself as far as what the findings are in that investigation. The ultimate person who makes the final decision as to what happens with anyone in the organization is myself. The other person who has an opportunity to review those circumstances is the city manager. But once it comes through the chain of command through our process, they can either give me a sustainment, and I'll give you an example in this case, is that there was a non-sustaining on the supervisors, and I overturned that because I felt that it was important that those supervisors are responsible and held at a higher rating or higher responsibility than the officers. And therefore, though they were not sustained, I ended up sustaining them outside the scope or outside the parameters that were brought to my attention.
If you could, for people who are watching and they hear you say sustaining or they got a letter of counseling, what does that mean?
Sustaining means that there was enough information to determine that it actually happened and that they were in violation of the policy and or procedure.
Chief, can you share your initial reaction when you did see that video and you saw the hesitation?
You don't want me to tell you what I said. It wasn't very good. It upset me as well. One of the things that I realized is that by looking at the video, I realized that it had been dubbed, because none of our videos, none of the information that we have shows where the call taker's information is put over and that the officers actually hear it. It doesn't happen. I'll give you another television example. How many of us watch 911? You look at a television show. The dispatcher is hearing, the call taker is getting the information, but she is actually putting the information in and telling them what to go do. In our situation, we have a call taker and a dispatcher. The call taker is the person that you're talking to on the telephone. The dispatcher is the person who is providing the information to the officers who are responding to a call. It's the same thing what happens in fire. You have a call taker and a dispatcher. So there's always that other person that sits in between the call taker and the police officer that's on the road when information is being disseminated.
Chief, have you had an opportunity to talk with the victim?
We have reached out to the victim and informed her that this case is done and that she probably should anticipate that there will be some type of news coverage pretty soon.
Okay, but any conversation about, I know you spoke to the community, I want everybody to have trust in us, but any direct conversation with her?
Well, I will tell you, once this happened, she took on a lawyer. So at that point, it's very difficult for us to, sit down and have that conversation. But because we had two independent witnesses, which took place, plus we had a plethora of body cam, it was easier for us not to re-traumatize her and make sure that she was aware that we are in the process of doing this. So we've had our internal affairs office reach out to her to let her know that this was coming.
Is there a sense of what discipline Officer De La Rosa would have received had they gone through the process?
He would have probably, it really depends on what his, if he had anything else that was in his internal affairs file, if it was a like or similar offense. The way the matrix is that, there are certain levels of discipline that can be issued based on the contract with the officers, and depending on what the circumstances would have been, it would have probably been something along a letter of reprimand with regards to his comments.
And so why did he resign?
He resigned during the course of the investigation, and unfortunately, he took a job somewhere else.
No law enforcement job?
Yes, not here, out of state. Out of state. Not in the state of Florida. I will clarify that.
During your investigation, can you explain how the blogger or blogger knew to request that specific video?
Great question, and I really don't have an answer for you. But what we get are a number of, people who ask for officer-related incidents. We have really no idea how he ended up picking that. He just could have just gone through and saw one of the previous police reports in the past. We don't know if he made contact with the owner, not the owner, but the victim. So we really don't know how.
Can we update the status of the suspect and his criminal proceedings?
He is still at Johnny Pope. He has a $50,000 bond, and he's awaiting for trial.
We'll wrap up questions. Super quickly. All right.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Chief.